Hello, my name's Fraser Simons. I'm with Springboard Thought is my channel, and I wanted to talk about what we used to just call people having a mind's eye, which I guess has been changed into a spectrum of fantasia, and I am hyperphantasic, which is pretty much what I expected. I can picture things quite vividly in my mind's eye, whereas people without one cannot. And there's a full-on spectrum between the two, and people aren't really aware of that. But I just saw a video at Bookish Realm where she was going over how she doesn't have hyperphantasia, or she doesn't have. She's at the opposite end of the spectrum as me. She has no real mind's eye, and so I thought it would be interesting because when people evaluate the fiction that they're consuming, what ends up happening is they, of course, are subjectively interpreting what they're reading and then garnering opinion about it. And usually there's two types of people that I have noticed anyway. And one is very interested in, for me as a hyperphantasic, I guess would be the term. What I lean towards in literary stuff is hyperspecificity, because I want to be generating the scene in my head very vividly, and I need information in order to do that, depending on what I'm reading. The biggest culprits of genre that don't do this typically is historical fiction. Ironically, I guess they just assume that people can picture this stuff because we've been consuming it in some form or another. But I wrote a Medium article semi-recently, like a year ago, when I was reading Wolf Hall, which kind of read like just a play to me. It was essentially, most chapters didn't even set the scene. It was just two people in a room with dialogue, or two or more people. And very, very, very rarely was any description spared for anything whatsoever, except for active verbiage when people were moving and things like that. But there was no description of the surroundings. And I sort of made a semi-joke post that when I was reading it and it was late at night, because there was no description, I could kind of throw any tropes and any set dressing onto what I was picturing in my head, and the story would take place because there was nothing in it to contradict the descriptions that I was projecting onto it. So it became like a very weird, almost like Nosferatu type picture in my head. And some of it might have been like a rebellion in my mind for kind of the boredom that I was experiencing, because I'm pretty sure I have some form of ADHD thing going on that is only gotten worse as I've gotten older. But if I'm not being stimulated enough in order to generate the mind's eye and the vivid picture that I need, then I conflate that with bad writing, basically, and I get bored. And that's not the case for everybody, of course, and it is, I think, aptly called hyperphantasia, because I think most people are pretty good at filling in the details. If you look at interviews with really prolific and well-to-do authors like let's say Neil Gaiman, I know I've seen him talk about this, where he says specifically he doesn't like to give too much description, and he likes to lead the reader along in a very sparing way, because people can fill in scenes very well. Well, for me, that doesn't work for me. I don't like projecting my own consciousness onto these things. I would rather a lot of specificity, and I would rather sort of flowery sentence structures, is what people who enjoy Hemingway would call it, but I would just call good prose work, basically. And so I think this is why we're always going to have two camps of thinkers, the Hemingway-esque people that are like, they like short, declarative, what I would call clipped sentences. And then there's the people who want sentence structures that are more interesting and evocative and compelling because they want to summon what they need to summon in their mind. If you aren't compiling a picture in your mind, I could see why that would be very boring and very uninteresting. And yet for me, when I was reading Wolf Hall, that was what I was kind of getting from it. It was boring. The dialogue was very interesting. The most exciting thing about that Wolf Hall book, and all three of them I read, was the dialogue for me. But it was very much like I was sitting in front of a play in which they had no sets, and they like only wore one kind of costume, which is my end-all be-all of Elizabethan sort of costuming, which is like weird doublets and some jewelry and like feathered caps and stuff like that. And who knows if that's correct or not. I haven't actually watched the Tudors before, but the thing is that I was reading historical fiction in order to get those details. Part of it was I wanted to learn what this place looked like and what grounded fiction in this time period and these people and their mannerisms and everything would be. And I only got a slice of that from Wolf Hall because it's not interested in that kind of stuff. So it's just basically up to what the author is actually interested in seeing and generating and talking about. And I mean, clearly when you read, you'll see if the author is clicking with you in the sense that, are they interested in exploring the same things about the fiction as you? And if not, people tend to conflate that with bad writing, but it's just with neurotypicalness or narrow atypicalness, it's a spectrum. And so people need to start having more engaging and maybe curious, non-judgmental conversations about why people specifically like an author or a passage or what have you about the book, because people literally don't think like you, most likely. You'll find people that may, but that doesn't mean that they're finding the same components of the craft work as compelling as you are for the same reason that you are. And like I said, I have I'm blessed somewhat by being hyperphantasic, which is I can think back on my life and pretty much picture everything with basically real life detail. Like if I had any skill as an artist at all, I could paint my favorite tree from 10 years ago when I went to Campbell's River in BC one time, and I read under that tree every day. And I can picture what it smelled like, what it all the details about that scene basically, as well as my family and my friends. There's a aphantasia and Fantasia spectrum test that the aforementioned channel had, and that's how I came to this conclusion. It's obviously not definitive and it's very subjective, but every scene that it asked me to conjure, it was hyper vivid, so that's why it said you're hyperphantasic, which is just confirming something that I pretty much always knew. But I think it's a very interesting test. Everybody should take it, find out what they're like, what they can summon in their mind's eye or not. I usually use it as a binary, which is interesting, and of course it makes sense that it's on a spectrum instead. I usually would ask people if they had a mind's eye or not to what degree is it vivid, so that makes more sense to me. And it makes even more sense to me that for a living, I'm a tabletop role-playing game designer, which you have to produce pictures in your head in order to play, basically. Like, there's not really a medium that is conducive to people that would be aphantasic, because the collaborative nature of the fiction as you're generating it together, the social fiction, pretty much needs to be something that you are summoning in your eye, or in your mind's eye rather, then because there's no other craft work or story components that a novel has for people to latch onto. I mean, you could stick it out, I suppose, and sort of figure out if you like the overall story that we're telling together, or if your character arc was interesting, or just enjoying each other's time. But I imagine that with the inability to summon the fiction in your mind while tabletop role-playing would be very difficult. So I think that would be an interesting thing, and it explains, again, why some people just wouldn't be interested in playing tabletop role-playing games. But anyway, I've rambled on about this for a while. I think that's all I had to say about it. I would be interested to see if you, where you are on the spectrum, and to have a discussion about this, and I'll put the same link down below that the channel had, as well as the original video that I saw on this, and hopefully we can have a productive discussion about this. That's it for me. I'm Fraser Simons. I hope that you are having a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.